All right, we're going to continue mechanisms of evolution or for evolution. Migration into or out of the population can change allele frequencies. And that makes sense, right? So if individuals come into the population, that changes the allele frequencies in the population. If individuals leave the population, that changes the allele frequencies in the population. And so that's an agent, that's a mechanism for change. So if I look at that, so imagine population 1, population 2, and these are the alleles. When individuals leave, coming here, this population changes from here to here. That would be evolution. And as individuals come in, they bring in their genes, and it changes the population from here to here. So migration, gene flow, affects the gene pool in a population. And then lastly, natural selection. So what I had said was that slide, I'm going to go back to it really quickly. I had said that this is an important slide, right? It is an important slide. So we talked about mutations, we talked about genetic drift, migration, now for natural selection. And this was the biggie that Darwin talked about. So natural selection, how the environment has an effect on the population and how the population changes over time because of environmental pressures. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go back to that slide. Okay, so when 3 simple conditions are satisfied, evolution by natural selection is occurring. Okay, so please remember these 3 things. This is a biggie, okay? So number 1, variation in the population, okay? We already know there's variation in the population. Remember, mutations guarantee that there's variation in the population. So think about, again, eye color. Everyone has different eye color, or height, different heights, or hair color, or skin color, or stuff inside our bodies for that matter. Our fingerprints on our cell membranes are different. Our blood types are different, et cetera, et cetera. So there's variation in the population, number 1. Number 2, the variation's heritable. Okay, so people pass on their genes to their babies, right? So there's heritability. And finally, okay, so number 1 and number 2, they're pretty easy to understand. Then number 3 is the one that's let me think about it. Individuals with one version of the trait must produce more offspring than those with a different version. So it's the idea of fitness. So in the population, certain individuals are going to do better than others. And if they do better, if they survive better, the idea of survival of the fittest, if they survive better, they're going to have more babies. And if they have more babies, that's going to affect the population because it affects allele frequencies in the population. Okay, so 3 things, right? Variation in the population. Look at, these are all dogs and there was variation. These are all people, and there's variation. So number 1, variation. Number 2, variation's heritable. This is Goldie Hawn, and this is her daughter, right? And you can see their similarities, right? So that there's heritability. And finally, 3, differential reproductive success. So this idea is that there are more organisms born than survive, organisms continually struggling. Some organisms are more likely to win the struggle and survive and reproduce. So here's a picture of a dog with her puppies. And if you look, they're getting milk. This guy's out, okay? The runt of the litter, right? The tiniest dog. And if it doesn't get milk, it's going to pass away. And if it passes away, the genes go with it, right? If it doesn't make it to reproductive success, right, having babies, yeah. So this idea of variation, these are different chromosomes and these are the different alleles. So there's variation in the population, different versions of a trait, heritable, and then different reproductive success. Okay. This is a beautiful picture. This is another slide that's really important. This shows natural selection. So here are these rabbits. They have different speeds. So there's variation in running, okay? That variation is heritable. So the slow guys have slow babies. The medium guys have medium, speed babies. The fast guys have fast, okay? Then there's the environment to contend with. And some are going to survive better than others, okay? And those who survive better have more babies, have better reproductive success. So over time, the population, you're going to have faster rabbits, okay? So the rabbit populations is evolving. And of course, the fox population would be evolving too. So there's this thing called coevolution. And we see this a lot in nature. Okay, so the four mechanisms, right? So mutation was one, genetic drift was one, migration was one, and then natural selection. And Darwin talked about evolution through natural selection. Okay. So we see adaptations as a result of evolution. This guy blending in and then having all that blubber, right? Can that be a result of evolution, right? Through natural selection, populations of organisms can become adapted to their environment. The idea of owls, the idea of the mice, okay, and how they're adapted to their environment. Traits causing some individuals to have more offspring than others become more prevalent in the population. So having those faster rabbits. So this idea of fitness. Okay. Fruit flies, right? Let's see. That I don't like the fruit fly example because it was in the lab. It was artificial. Okay, so that's not a good example of natural selection. Okay. All right, so they give more examples of fitness and being fit. So, organisms and populations can become better matched through natural selection, and we see that. Natural selection does not lead to perfect organisms. Why not? Why? Okay, I'm going to go back. I don't know. I can't mute this cuz I'm not in front of you guys. Why? Why would natural selection not lead to perfect organisms? Let's think about it. Could it be that the environment is constantly changing? Yes, right? That's why. The environment's not static, it changes, and so that affects the populations. It says evolution in general and natural selection specifically do not guide organisms towards perfection. Okay, because that doesn't happen. The environment's changing. The alleles causing traits favored by natural selection may change too. Why doesn't natural selection lead to perfect organisms? That's why. Okay. Environments change quickly. Variation is needed. There may be multiple different alleles, which cause an individual to have same fitness. So you can have different individuals and they're fit. Okay. Okay, so now to talk about different types of selection. There's natural selection, there's artificial selection. Artificial, meaning we're doing it, okay? And I love it. We're not in class right now, so we can't discuss this, and maybe I can have this as a discussion. When we were talking about this in a class, and a student said, well, with global warming, is that kind of like artificial selection? I was like, that's a good idea. Good question. Well, are we part of our environment? Are we natural? The things that we've created, like with automotives and with factories and so on, and how they're affecting the environment and affecting populations, we're part of the system too. We're part of the ecosystem, right? So the idea of artificial selection, animal breeders and farmers have been doing this for years and years, selecting for crops, selecting for cows that make more milk, cows that make tastier meat. Yeah, that sounds gross, doesn't it? But it's real. So artificial selection. Natural selection can change traits in population in several ways. Okay. So we can have directional selection, different types of natural selection. Again, I think the author did not use a good example. Imagine the population, and there's variation in the population. So the fact that there's variation in the population, like those fruit flies, some that die quickly, have really low starvation resistance than the average, then that some that have higher starvation resistance. So there is variation in the population. Okay. Now, if natural selection happens and it shifts a curve one way, it's called directional selection. So I wish they didn't use these turkeys, because turkeys are really a result of artificial selection. I wish they used the rabbits. The faster rabbits, if the population, they're slow, medium, and fast, and if over time we get more faster rabbits, if that's the case, then that would be directional selection. It says directional selection. It doesn't have it here. Okay, so basically the average population is shifting towards one extreme. Stabilizing selection. For whatever reason, the selection is selecting for the average. This could be an example with baby weight. Usually, well, now with new advances in medicine, we see this changing a little bit. But imagine in the past, having a baby too big was not a good thing. Babies with high birth weights were more vulnerable for complications. Having a babies who are too small, that was caused complications. Maybe they didn't survive, like preemies and so on. If they're too big, maybe they didn't survive because we couldn't have them, right? That was before C-sections. So natural selection would be selecting for the intermediate, the intermediate birth weight. And so the individuals with the intermediate phenotypes are most fit. That's stabilizing selection. And finally, disruptive selection. Okay, again, this would be the regular average bell curve here. And for whatever reason, the extremes on either end are what are selected for. So it says individuals with extreme phenotypes experience the highest fitness. Those with the intermediate have the lowest. So an example of this are salmon. It says medium fish get outcompeted by larger fish, so larger fish do well. But smaller fish are able to sneak in and fertilize the eggs before being detected. So there are different types of natural selection, right? Directional, right? So faster rabbits. Stabilizing, whatever's in the middle, that phenotype's what's selected for. And disruptive, kind of the outliers are what are selected for. All right. It says natural selection can cause the evolution of complex traits and behavior. Can natural selection affect behavior? The answer is yes. We see that. Behavior can be inherited, okay? They talk about maze bright rats or maze dull rats. That sounds so funny. Imagine rats and they go into a maze, and how many mistakes do they do, or do they learn from their mistakes as they're going through the maze? So it says rats making most errors are selected and bred. So they're slow learners. And over time, we see they get worse and worse, okay, making more mistakes. Versus the fast learners, rats making fewer errors in the maze are selected and bred for. And over time, they're making fewer and fewer mistakes. And it says after 6 generations of selection, the rats selected for fast learning made only half the errors. So really interesting, this idea of behavior. Evolution can affect behavior. Yeah. And finally, in this chapter, there's the evidence of evolution, okay? So, is evolution really happening? And if it's happening naturally, how are there evidences? Can we see it? This is a beautiful picture. Can you see the animal in the picture? Bam, right? The seahorse. All right, we're going to go ahead and stop here, and we'll continue.